I buried the man I was yesterday, and I don't visit his grave. MichaelMcLean.coach. You can subscribe for free to my daily broken email videos just like this in your email box. Every morning, 6 a.m. I don't take any days off. Nothing to buy. MichaelMcLean.coach. My 90-year young father is one of the most humble, compassionate, empathetic people that I've ever dealt with. I've been a ex-pro hockey coach, ex-amateur hockey team owner and coach. I've been a 6, 7, and 8-figure entrepreneur for the last 32 years. So I've been in the people business a long time. But a full confession, my dad is one of the kindest and most humble people that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I had the privilege of finally working with my dad for 17 glorious years in the insurance business. When I graduated from university, it looked like I was going to be in the pro hockey business the rest of my life. My dream was to coach in the NHL, and I was well on my way to the National Hockey League when I was fired from my second professional job. And then my dad and I started working together in the family business for 17 consecutive years, and the rest of it is all story. But I'll never. One of the things that, working toe to toe and belly to belly and shoulder to shoulder with my pop all these years, is the fact that it really struck me how humble and how confident and how certain he was as a person. And I could never really completely understand it, because I was like, Dad, you've had so many brutal struggles in your life. If you don't know my dad has been an entrepreneur since age 15. But he had a very difficult start in life when he was abandoned at childbirth in the hospital. So given up on by his mom and dad. He became what they termed a ward of the state or a ward of the province. After 30 days, if a child is abandoned at a hospital once they're born, they go into foster care. So after 30 days, my dad started the first month of his life being abandoned by his mom and dad. Then he was adopted into a family with two hardworking parents who were very old. They had already raised their 5 children. My dad's siblings were alcoholics. They were partiers. They were smokers. They were boozers, and they all had jobs as bootlickers, so to speak. There wasn't a shred of entrepreneurial blood in their system. And in spite of all of these shortcomings, all of these challenges, all of these roadblocks, my dad was somehow able to eventually be inducted into the Perth Blue Wings Hall of Fame, the Hockey Hall of Fame. He quit school in grade 9, never went back, drove a truck at age 15 for a feed company, throwing what he called 100-pound bags of sugar around all day. And then he finally, in his early 20s, decided that the only life that he wanted to live was as an entrepreneur. He wanted to be a man of freedom. He wanted to be a man of independence. And he turned his truck driving days into the general store days. My dad actually ran a pool hall, an arcade, snooker, 8-ball place, built it up on the main street of our community. And then he sold that business And then with my older sister born and myself being a newborn, he bought a general store in a small village outside of our town. And we lived for 5 years in the back of the general store. My dad worked 7 days a week, every single day but Christmas. The only day the store was closed was on Christmas. My dad had what he calls half an employee. He had a high school kid that lived across the street, so if we ever had anything to do with school, or my sister had a piano recital, or I had a hockey game or a baseball game, my dad would never, ever, ever miss anything that we were doing in terms, and still putting in, 110, 120 hours, death dealing hours. But he never complained. He had a plan. He walked out of the back of the store every day at 7 a.m. and opened the store, and he would walk back in at 9 p.m. Just think about that, doing that for 5 consecutive years. Literally 14-hour days every day but Christmas. But I cannot remember my mom or my dad missing anything. Not one single thing that was important. And even though my dad wasn't making any money, we were a blue-collar family at the time. It's just amazing the impact that has on a little boy or a little girl in the first 5 years of your life. Seeing your mom and dad work so hard, raise a family, make ends meet, and how, it changes your mindset from, oh, I'm a victim, or I, it's not fair, to, wow, these people just get up and work. Where their mentality was, work is the reward. The opposite of today, where work is something to be avoided. You sit there the first 5 years of your life, which are the most impactful when it comes to your character and your self-image and your self-esteem, and you watch your mom and dad put in 14-hour days for 5 years every day but Christmas, and zero complaint. And then after 5 years, my dad got into the life insurance business. Then he got into the general insurance business, and he finally retired a handful of years ago at age 85. He worked on his own terms for 71 years. His business and entrepreneurial career since he started, driving that feed truck without a driver's license, never even told them, they thought he was like 18. And he drove those hundreds of sugar around and hundreds of flour around at 15, unloading those all day, every day, and playing hockey in the evenings. And man, oh man, 71 glorious years of working after dropping out of school in grade 9 and never looking back. And most impressively, a present father, an excellent husband, and a great, wonderful father, grandfather, and now actually great-grandfather. So, and boy, has he done a lot, and my mom done a lot in the community for charities, for sports teams, for youth sports, through the church, you name it. Talk about a badass legacy. So, my dad said to me one day, when I was talking to him, we used to have lunch every Monday. We'd go across to the pub and we'd have a couple of draft beer on a Monday, and then we'd have some lunch, and we just talked for like 2-3 hours sometimes about life, about politics, about sports, about family, about marriage, about marketing, about losses and wins. But my dad never, ever, ever was a storyteller in terms of sharing his wins. I'm like, Dad, you were, people come up to me on the street and they say, your father was the greatest hockey player this town has ever seen. And then you're the first inductee into the Perth Blue Wings Hall of Fame, and you still don't say a word about it. You talk about being recruited at age 15 and you were on the Chicago Blackhawks radar back in the day when there was only 5 NHL teams. And I said, you don't have any old jerseys, you don't have any old team photos, you don't have any old team jackets, because when we were little kids, especially my younger brother and I, we're like, Dad, we want to where's your old jerseys and your old sticks, and we want to see this stuff and use it. My dad had none of it in our home. There was not one hockey photo. There was not one business photo. There was not one old jersey. Zero memorabilia. And I always wondered, I'm like, Dad, I'm so interested in these stories, and I have my own memories, but how did you do it? How did you come from nothing to a God-made entrepreneur and business owner, husband and father like you were? And his humility was always, I don't talk about the past. I don't talk about the past. And then one day I was pressing him. I was like, Dad, how did you go from driving a truck at age 15 without a license to owning the pool hall to being in the general store business, then moving to the life insurance business, and then finally the insurance business? How the hell did you go from being abandoned at the hospital, being adopted into another family, and putting together 71 glorious years of business and entrepreneurship, a 71-year working career without any complaint? The ups, the downs, the frustrations, the disappointments, the banks kicking him out of the meeting, nobody wanting to lend him money, being barely able to make payroll in the beginning, all of this stuff. And finally, he said to me one day when I was standing in the office in front of his desk, he goes, Michael, get it through your head. I buried the man I was yesterday, and I do not visit his grave. And I was like stunned. I was like, my dad had told me to buzz off or go kick rocks multiple times when I was always asking him about his hockey career and his parents and all this other stuff. But man, did that ever hit home when he said, every day I bury the man I was yesterday, and I don't visit his grave. How many people, myself included, can take that advice in 2024? How many of us get up and try and run somebody else's race? How many of us get up and compare ourselves, check out social media, see what friends, family, coworkers, siblings, celebrities, athletes, how many of us get up and do almost everything but run our own race? I would say 99.9% of the population now is obsessed with the opinions of other people, what other people are doing. Oh, look at on Book of Faces, their vacation is better than mine. Their car is better than mine. Their home is bigger than mine. Their kids are more successful than my kids. And it's the root of all unhappiness. Running your own race is the root of happiness. Comparing yourself to nobody but the man or woman in the glass is the secret to happiness. My grandmother used to pound that into our heads when she would hear us. And this is back in the 80s, before anti-social media, before cell phones, when she would say, don't let me ever hear you comparing yourself or gossiping about your classmates. She would say, the only person you have to worry about, and it's a full-time job, is you. Make you better. Run your own race. And then when my dad said that to me when we were working together, I buried the man I was yesterday, and I don't visit his grave. So my dad was uncomfortable talking about Hall of Fame hockey days. He was uncomfortable talking about, the pool hall or the general store. He was uncomfortable talking about being abandoned at the hospital. He was uncomfortable about, his financial problems early. And I can totally understand that. But over the last few years, and working together, it's the stories came out because I just kept asking him, tell me the story tell me about your dad, tell me about your mom, tell me about your birth parents, tell me about, being drafted. Tell me about your first car. Tell me about the general store. And he's become, of course, more open and more, but that humility and that mindset of I buried the man I was yesterday and I do not visit his grave. And I think the secret, an orphan like my dad, an adopted child like my dad with very few role models, or no role models. My dad is the ultimate Uncle Earl Nightingale student. If Uncle Earl Nightingale, the godfather of personal achievement, was around, he'd give my dad an attaboy when my dad said, I used to grill my dad. I'm like, Dad, how in the hell, when you had no role models, you didn't have anybody to show you how to do anything other than what not to do? You didn't have any entrepreneur in your family. You didn't have any business owners. You didn't have any athletes. You didn't have anybody to look up for. You didn't even have a person to ask questions. You didn't have any mentors like I've had. And when he said that to me years and years ago, he said, son, I just looked around at all the people in my life, and he said, I just knew I didn't want this. I didn't want this. I didn't want the living for the weekends. I didn't want the alcohol addiction. I didn't want the toxic attitudes. I didn't want the unhappiness. I didn't want any of it. And my dad didn't even know Earl Nightingale existed. But he said, I just looked around and said, I know one thing, I don't want this. So if I don't want this for my future, for my life, then I've got to do what? And then he said, I got to do the exact opposite of everybody around me in terms of my health, in terms of my wealth, in terms of my marriage, in terms of how I raise my kids. It was transformational, but it's stunning that a person without any role models, without any mentors, without any heroes, can literally build their life and become a hero in their own home. And it all goes back to that Earl Nightingale concept that if you don't have any role models, you don't have any mentors, and you're literally surrounded by people doing the wrong things, you don't need any self-help books. Just do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. My dad has another saying about that it's always stuck in my brain is, if it's popular, it's wrong. If it's popular, it's wrong. And I've applied that to so many things in my world, whether it was, the use of technology or smoking or drinking or weed or pornography or television or politics, any of that stuff. If it's popular with the great unwashed arses, then it's wrong. And it may not always appear to be wrong at the beginning, but it's like if the herd is doing it, if the quiet desperation is doing it, it's wrong. And that's one that stuck with me. If it's popular, it's wrong. But man, I've been thinking about this for the last week. I buried the man I was yesterday, and I don't visit his grave. How many of us, myself included, do bury the man we were yesterday? We start walking, or we start drinking water every day. We start reading a few pages. We start, doing some deep work copywriting. We start dating our wives. We get in better shape. We start speaking to ourselves in a more positive, purposeful manner. But then we go and visit the grave. We dig that old person back up. We don't forgive ourselves and move on. We don't understand that we're mistake-making machines and that we're put on this world to make mistakes. Just don't make the same mistake every time over and over. But how many of us actually do successfully bury the man or the woman we are, but we don't forgive ourselves and move on? That to me is what that statement means more than anything. Because you hear that from the fake gurus and the pretend experts and the fuzzy-headed academics who've never left campus. oh, just forgive yourself and every day is a new day. Every day is a new day. It's a God-given gift, but only if we stop visiting the grave. Okay, I've lived by my count, I've lived 15 different lives. Everything from being a child to being a teenager to being a university student to coaching junior to coaching pro, to running my own teams, to being in the window washing business, being in the insurance business, being a husband, being a father. I'm the same as you. Like there's been multiple worlds that I've lived in. Different places, different faces. But the thing that's stunning the most to me is we get a clean slate, but then we keep going to visit the grave. Well, I screwed up as a parent when my kid was 5, and you just keep digging that. My dad calls it dragging those skeletons around. You know what? If we all had a redo in any area of our life, we would take it. But that's not life. You do the best that you can. Our parents do the best that they can under their circumstances. My parents were born into the Depression. My parents, they did the very best they could for us. And I'm one of the very blessed to have my two heroes as my mom and dad. But there's so much wisdom in that. I buried the man I was yesterday, and I don't visit his grave. You mean I can now see the wisdom in my dad not talking about the past. He'll do it if we ask. Emery, my daughter, will ask questions about Grandpa, and I think that's incredibly valuable. Hearing the stories about the general store and the stuff that my dad sold and how much a gallon of gas was, and my dad, all the stuff. But I can understand my dad's mental discipline where he's like, I'm not going back. I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to talk about that unless it's with family or whether it's with my grandchildren. I buried the man I was yesterday, and I do not visit the grave. Man, the only competition we have is that person that's staring back at us every morning when we brush our teeth. All the confusion and noise out there. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to be on social, you got to be an influencer, you got to build. Are you kidding me? When you're brushing your teeth in the morning, the only competition you have is that man or woman staring back in the glass. The man or woman in the glass. That's your only competition. When I was coaching my last championship junior team, I just kept pounding away to our guys because, we're not losing any games. We have one of the strongest teams in franchise history. And I was just relentless with my blue chip athletes. I'm like, I don't give a shit what our record says. I don't care how good our power play is. I don't care how good our penalty killing is. I don't care about any of that stuff. Are you better as a player and as a young man than you were a day ago? And that's, of course, the Nick Saban approach. That's the Mike Krzyzewski approach. That was the Bill Parcells approach, is forget about the scoreboard and focus on becoming the best version of you. And that's become very popular on anti-social media. But I like my dad's take on it even better. Every day he gets up, he's a new guy. He's a new person who's blessed with 24 hours, and he doesn't spend one bit of energy wasting his finite time or wasting his finite energy on any of that bullshit. He's like, I buried that guy yesterday, and I'm not going to go dig up the grave. And I think there's so much wisdom in that. It's something I wanted to put on video. It's something I wanted to write about. And I think that if there's something in 2024 for us as entrepreneurs, as husbands, as fathers, as grandfathers, the children today, is focus on yourself, run your own race, and stop visiting the grave. Who you were a year ago is a different person. Who you were a decade ago, if you're separated or divorced, that stuff, leave that shit in the past. You learn from it. You can share those ideas with your grandkids. But for 99%, it's got to be buried in the past and move forward. That way, all of our precious finite energy and time is then put towards becoming even better, even that 1% of 1% of 1% better. And I gotta agree with my dad, living in the past. Your past does not equal your future, as Tony Robbins says. Your past does not equal your future. Every day you open up your eyes, you got 24 glorious hours. We have no clue how long we have on this planet, but getting up and burning the ships, going all in and burying that man or that woman that you were and not visiting the grave is a massive, massive life hack. So, in unrelated news, if you're not a subscriber to my monthly print newsletter, the Michael McLean World Building Newsletter, I'm going to tell you right now, if there was ever a time to subscribe for the $97 and one of these free black t-shirts, the t-shirt's worth $97. This is the month. The link is below. And let me tell you why I think it's absolutely non-negotiable that you subscribe if you haven't and get a copy of my print newsletter, my March newsletter, which I'm just finishing up now, and it's going to be printed and shipped off. It'll be in your mailbox. This is the month because I'm talking about one of my all-time favorite topics. As a former coach, as a consultant, as a husband, as a father, I must admit that this is one of my favorite topics. I could talk about this all day. I used to preach to my athletes. I used to preach to my employees. I used to preach about this stuff all the time, and that's brass balls time management. My mentor, the great Dan Kennedy, said it best one time. He said, if you don't manage your time, Michael, he says, you're not going to have any money to manage. I'll never forget that when we had a mastermind at Disney. I had won Marketer of the Year for GKIC, and I had a half-day consultation with Dan and Bill Glazier, and we're talking about hockey and life and the insurance business. And he said, Michael, he says, so much of it comes down to brass balls, time management. If you don't have real brass balls, time management, he says, you're never going to have any money to manage. He says, people have it ass backwards. He said, if you don't have control of your time, you're never going to have control of your money. So he said to me, it all starts with that brass balls mentality that 99.9% of people don't have. That's why they're a slave to their company. That's why they're running a Frankenstein business. That's why this hasn't worked out. Work for yourself. Because now they just have a high-paying job or a low-paying job. But they don't have freedom. They don't have personal sovereignty. They don't have autonomy, the things that I talk about, because they don't have brass balls time management. That's the number one and only topic of this month's letter. Is I'm going to talk about a way, and this is just one of the articles, but I'm going to show you in this month's letter how to save a minimum 40 hours a month. So that's 10 hours a week. What would you do with 10 hours freed up? Not to work more, not to work more. I'm talking about 10 hours a week that you're pissing away for sure, okay? And it's more than that. But what would happen if I could show you how to save 10 hours a week, 40 hours a month, work less, but actually double your income this year? It's not a hard trick to do. I used to work the 90 hours, 110 hours, but I wasn't married. I didn't have Krista in my life. I didn't have a daughter. I wasn't coaching hockey. So that was easy to do in my 20s and 30s. But nobody's going to tolerate that. So I learned through guys like Dan Kennedy and Bill Glazier, I learned brass balls time management. If I'm not going to manage my time properly, I'm not going to have any money to manage. So that's the topic of this month's newsletter. And I'm going to show you, my promise to you, it's $97 a month for me to send this to you. Okay? That's $3 and I hate to do math publicly, $3.45 a day. That's the coffee I bought this morning at Dunkin' Donuts. $3.45 a day for me to write a 22-page letter, ship it to your door, and for you to study how to save yourself slash 10 hours a week, slash 40 hours a month, but not to do more. I'm not talking about slashing, a couple hours a day, 10 hours a week so that you can work more. I'm talking about doing it like I do, where I work every day, 3 to 4 to 5 hours, no more than 5 hours. Some days I'll work an hour, some days I work 5 hours, but I work every day. I love it. But I'm just like, it's time to do more, time to date your wife, time to walk, time to relax, time to with the big flexes or afternoon naps, and not carrying your cell phone all the time, or having time to coach your kids or your grandkids' sports teams, or just having a vacation where you're not putting out fires. So that's what the link is below. I'll send you one of these badass Be Relentless black t-shirts as a free bonus. Plus you'll get the badass Brass Balls Time Management Edition. That's all it's about. And let me help you slash 40 hours off your month, 10 hours off your week. And if I can't do it, or if you're not going to execute, what's the big thing? You end up with a cool t-shirt. The link is below, mjmletter.com. That's MGM letter, and I think it's .com. Could be .coach. The link is below. Don't go on what I say. Go on what the link Marc-Andre put below. And sign up so that this righteous edition is in your mailbox in March. Brass Balls Time Management. If you can't manage your time, you're never going to have any money to manage. That's it. Please remember that story like I have of my pop. Man, I buried the man I was yesterday, and I do not visit his grave. 2 words that changed my life, 2 words that can change yours. Be relentless.